My name is Daniel Reeves. I am 47 years old, and I have held the rank of Lieutenant Colonel in the United States Army for longer than most of the new officers on base have even worn a uniform. I never thought I would have to introduce myself like that, but somewhere along the way I stopped being a person people recognized and turned into a shadow that moved around the edges of the command building. The first moment I realized something had shifted came on a Tuesday morning when I walked into work, expecting another packed day of briefings, only to find my access badge blinking red at the main entrance like it was confused about who I was. A sergeant pushed the door open from the inside and gave me the kind of smile people use when they think they should know you but are not quite sure. I brushed it off as a technical glitch, but that small sting stayed with me as I stepped into a hallway that used to feel like home. 2 decades in uniform teaches you discipline, patience, and how to read a room faster than you can breathe. That morning, the room read me like I was a stranger. No nods from the younger officers who used to rush for my guidance, no morning updates waiting on my desk, not even a printed agenda on the chair. I thought maybe I had missed a memo, maybe the schedule had been reshuffled again, and maybe this sudden quiet was temporary. The truth landed later, sharp as gravel under a boot. My office had been reassigned. The door with my old nameplate was locked, and a laminated sign taped over it pointed toward a temporary space near the supply warehouse like that was supposed to make everything fine. When I walked down the side hallway to that tiny room, the cold draft from the loading bay blew straight across my desk, carrying the smell of oil, metal, and cardboard. It felt less like a workspace and more like a holding pen. The box on the table had my notebooks, my old training files, and the framed commendation I once thought meant my career mattered. 20 years of strategy work, field analysis, and operational planning boiled down to a cardboard box with my name scribbled in marker. I sat there in that rattling metal chair, staring at 4 blank walls, and realized nobody had stopped to tell me anything. Nobody bothered to explain the shift or why my inbox was suddenly empty. It was as if I had been erased with a single swipe. A few soldiers passed the doorway carrying gear, and one of them glanced in with polite confusion on his face. I nodded out of habit, but he looked away like he expected someone older, someone more important, someone who used to sit in my real office. I tried to tell myself that feelings did not matter, that the mission always came first, but even the toughest soldier knows when something is off. 20 years of leading teams, building protocols, and shaping the backbone of this unit should have counted for something. Instead, it felt like I had been left in a corner to collect dust like old equipment waiting for disposal. I scrolled through my calendar, hoping to find at least one meeting where my presence was needed. The screen was blank. Not empty with purpose, not open by design, just blank in a way that told me no one remembered to include me. I leaned back, letting the reality sit heavy on my chest. This was not a firing. It was quieter than that, slower than that, almost polite in the way a person might step around an old piece of furniture they no longer wanted. I kept replaying moments from years before, times when commanders trusted me with decisions that shaped entire deployments. I thought about the soldiers who came back shaken and sat with me until they found their footing again. I thought about late nights writing policy drafts while everyone else slept because I believed in the mission more than my own comfort. I held on to all of that like a lifeline as I sat in that little room, listening to the warehouse doors slam open and shut. The Army had always been a place where your worth came from what you could carry, what you could fix, and what you could stand against. Now it seemed like they measured worth by how good you looked on camera, or how fresh your ideas sounded in a promotional video. The hardest part was not the demotion in space or the missing meetings. It was realizing how quickly people adjust to pretending you are not there. You walk the same halls and hear the same boots hitting the tile, but the conversation's lower when you pass by. You feel more like a visitor than the man who once trained half the people on that floor. I sat there, listening to the quiet buzz of the old fluorescent light, wondering how a career could fade without a sound. And as bitter as it felt, I knew this was only the beginning of a shift I had not chosen. A slow fade out that would take more from me before I was done facing it. I remember the day like a gut punch wrapped in applause. The whole ceremony had that stiff air of forced celebration, the kind where everyone's smiling but nobody's breathing. I sat in the second row, the seat they give to people who used to matter, staring at the polished boots of a kid barely old enough to rent a car, now stepping up to take my old title. He had the posture of someone fresh out of West Point, full of confidence, and probably still had his graduation certificate framed above his desk. His uniform was spotless, probably never seen a field op, and his custom-tailored jacket looked like something off a GQ runway. The suit alone probably cost more than my deployment bonus from Afghanistan in 2009. He stood there, flashing that to-practice smile, while the brigade commander laid it on thick with phrases like strategic thinker, visionary leader, future of the force. I had to clench my jaw when he thanked the general for entrusting him with the new directive for the 14th Operations Group. That directive had my fingerprints all over it. I wrote the original framework during a 3 a.m. strategy session in Kabul, pulling together fractured mission briefs and rewriting broken chain of command logic. Now it was being handed off like some new innovation tied in a bow. Not a word about the team who bled to build it. Not a nod to the men and women who had carried out the original vision under fire. The worst part wasn't the kid. He was just playing the role he was handed. The worst part was watching everyone pretend the baton pass was organic, earned, obvious. I watched the general clap him on the back like he'd just promoted Moses. And in that moment, I felt it. Not anger, not even hurt, just this deep, dull ache that comes from seeing something you built handed off to someone who never touched a brick. A kid in a $900 suit standing on the shoulders of ghosts he'd never met. It started with the names. Our old unit, once called Operational Strategy Command, became something ridiculous like Human Growth Enablement Division. They rolled it out with a slick PowerPoint, full of buzzwords and gradients, as if a new label could replace the blood and sweat we poured into the real work. The next week, the restructuring hit. They didn't fire people. That would have made noise. Instead, they reassigned veterans to titles so vague they might as well have been jobless. Pete, who had led logistics in 2 major deployments, was now listed as an adaptive integration liaison. He sat in a corner office with no team, no tasks, just a laptop and a monthly wellness survey. Maria, the best data analyst we ever had, got moved to civilian outreach metrics. I found out when her extension stopped ringing and her desk sat empty for 3 days before anyone noticed. It wasn't just rebranding, it was erasure. You'd see it in the way new signs appeared overnight. Our strategic readiness hub became the Future Potential Lab. They painted over plaques, shredded old training manuals, and replaced leadership principles with phrases that sounded pulled from a marketing blog. We used to call it the core. Now it felt like a startup trying to sell a lifestyle product. No more field briefings. No more quiet respect. Just open concept desks and inspirational posters about unlocking potential. The worst part wasn't the change. It was the silence. No one talked about it out loud, but you could feel it. Like walking through a town where everyone knows a funeral just happened, but no one dares say the name of the dead. My friends weren't retired. They were dissolved. And I was still standing, watching the unit I gave my life to turn into a brand. A name with no roots. A mission with no soul. It came on a Wednesday, slipped into my inbox like any other memo. Subject line: Role clarification update. No greeting, no context. Just a line from Lieutenant Collins, the aide to our new acting commander, and a link to a PDF with a smiley face at the end like we were joking about birthday cake orders. I clicked it, expecting some minor procedural shift. Instead, I found the sentence that pulled the plug on my entire career. Midway through page 3, it laid it out in cold language. My access to the core systems had been revoked. No longer responsible for mission review, no oversight on training protocols, no liaison responsibilities. I read the words twice, then again, slower. The kind of slow where your eyes move but your brain fights to catch up. I wasn't reassigned. I wasn't promoted. I wasn't even relieved. I was erased. There was no explanation, no transition plan, no instruction on what would happen to the work still under my name. Just blank space where purpose used to be. The The document didn't even list who would take over my duties. It was like those responsibilities vanished with my name. One click, and I was no longer needed. A man who had drafted full wartime strategy was now too outdated to copy-edit a field report. I sat there staring at the screen, hands frozen on the keyboard. The PDF just sat there too, like a funeral card left on a chair. The emoji at the end mocked me, cheerful in a way that felt almost cruel. I forwarded the email to my lawyer. She replied in under an hour with 4 words. "Don't sign anything yet." That was all. But it told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a quiet execution. Nobody came to talk. Nobody offered an explanation. The office hallway buzzed on like nothing happened. I still showed up. I still wore the uniform. But I was invisible now. No calendar invites. No calls. Just the hollow routine of a man they didn't have the decency to fire. They just hoped I'd take the hint. Fade out on my own. Retire quietly like a soldier who missed the last train out. But I wasn't built to disappear. Not like this. It happened on a Friday, right before lights out, in the narrow corridor between the mess and the comm center. Tyler Mitchell, a young corporal who used to run logistics under my command, pulled me aside without saying much. He looked over his shoulder twice before showing me his phone, the screen already dimmed, the battery low. The Slack thread was still open. It was a string of messages from the Executive Operations channel, not meant for anyone without high clearance. The first line was from Captain Royce, one of the new leadership imports. "Let's finalize the offloading package and scrub legacy noise before Q4 strategy kickoff." The word legacy hit me hard. But it was the next line that twisted something deep in my gut. DR equals legacy distraction. Confirm access, shut down pre-weekend. They were talking about me like I was a glitch in the system. Not a man, not a veteran, not a leader. Just an acronym they wanted to erase before the next fiscal meeting. There were replies underneath. Thumbs up, timelines, contingency phrases. They weren't planning around me. They were planning to remove me, quietly, permanently. I scrolled once more, just to make sure I wasn't misreading it. Then Tyler locked the screen and tucked the phone away like he'd just handed over a loaded weapon. I nodded once. Didn't say thank you. Didn't react. I couldn't afford to. I just walked back toward the barracks, keeping my face neutral, my steps steady. Inside, the ceiling fan spun low and slow, and the room smelled faintly of dust and boot polish. I sat on the edge of my bunk and stared at the wall, heart steady, thoughts moving fast. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't imagining it. They were clearing the slate, starting with me. That moment, something shifted. I stopped feeling erased and started feeling activated. If they were going to hunt ghosts, then I'd be the kind that left a trail of locked doors behind him. The war hadn't ended. It had just changed shape. And I was still in the fight. The house in Texas hadn't changed much. Same dust on the porch railing, same rust on the old mailbox. I parked the truck under the shade tree, left the engine ticking as I walked through the back door, straight to the closet where I kept what they forgot I still had. Top shelf, gray storage box, scratched, corners soft from time. I pulled it down and set it on the table with a thud. Inside were file folders, red labels in Sharpie. The kind I used to mark during the early days of command structuring, training modules, policy drafts, memorandums nobody wanted to take credit for but everyone signed off on. I sorted through them like a miner brushing off dust. Then I found it, a copy of the original operations charter. My initials still on the margin notes. Near the end of page 17, in the annex section, was a clause nobody ever cared about. A governance protocol drafted in case of executive misconduct, written in vague language, but direct enough for someone who knew what to look for. It granted intervention rights to senior authors of core doctrine in the event of structural misalignment or breach of foundational conduct. That clause hadn't been used in over a decade, but it was valid, still signed, still standing. They hadn't revoked it, probably because they didn't know it existed. It was buried under a layer of procedural dust and footnotes, and I was one of only 3 officers who had ever touched that page with authority. I pulled out the succession appendices next, highlighted cross-references, noted every policy they'd recently bent or broken. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was building a case. By the time the sun dipped behind the pines, I had 6 folders laid out in rows. 1 for legal, 1 for oversight, 1 for internal audit, 2 for chain of command review, 1 for the board. It wasn't just evidence, it was instruction. They tried to erase me, but they forgot who wrote the manual. And I was done sitting still. The first red flag was a line item from Q2, a $38,500 transfer to a vendor listed as Ridgepoint Tactical Solutions. I had never heard of them, and they weren't on any approved contractor list from my time. A quick check pulled up a Shell website. No staff directory, no contact outside a Gmail address. But the address was enough. Linked to a registered LLC in Virginia, owner Kyle Royce. First cousin to Captain Royce. Same name that popped up in 2 more contracts filed under consulting services. Exhibit A, clean printouts, source logs, signatures, no delivery receipts, no work product filed, just wire transfers. Red tab, upper right corner. Then came the briefing slides. Captain Royce's new strategy model, rolled out last month like it was cutting-edge theory. But 3 of the core modules were almost word-for-word lifts from a NATO white paper published in 2016. I laid the 2 documents side by side. Fonts changed, wording trimmed, but it was the same content, same flowcharts, same headings. No attribution, no citation. Exhibit B. Finally, Exhibit C. Internal notes showing the captain had skipped review procedures. He'd approved the funding routes himself, using temporary clearance while the oversight role was technically in transition. I flagged the chain in red, mapped it out line by line. Everything was time-stamped. Everything could be verified. This wasn't a grudge. It wasn't a story. It was a record. A structure built to hold, and I was going to bring it into the light. The clock read 8:59 when I stepped into the hall outside the main conference room. Polished boots on tile, the kind of click that used to mean something. I adjusted my collar, checked the folio under my arm, and waited for the doors to open. Inside, the room was already filling. Brass on one side, civilian advisors on the other. Screens lit up with charts and buzzwords. The young officer, Captain Royce, stood near the front, pointer in hand, mid-sentence. He didn't see me at first. When he did, he froze for half a second, then looked to his aide like maybe I was lost. But I wasn't there by accident. My seat was reserved. Per Advisory Clause 12C, as a legacy shareholder with direct authorship of structural doctrine, I had full participation rights. That wasn't an opinion. That was regulation. When the chair recognized me, I walked straight to the center table, placed the folio down, sat without asking. Nobody said a word. The silence wasn't awkward. It was alert. Tension thick enough to feel on your skin. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't ask for permission. I opened the folder. The war room had just become a courtroom, and I was here to file charges. The first slide came up with a single word, Exhibit A. I spoke clearly. A payment made to Ridgepoint Tactical Solutions. No contract, no deliverables, just a wire transfer signed off during a transitional clearance. Captain Royce kept his face straight, but his fingers twitched against the table. Exhibit B followed, strategy slides. 3 key modules lifted directly from NATO archives. No attribution, no source citation. Word-for-word blocks, dressed in new graphics. I flipped through the pages slowly, let the silence thicken after each one. Exhibit C. Conflict of interest. Vendor ownership traced directly to Royce's cousin. A chain of contracts rerouted through Shell LLCs. I highlighted each step, each approval, each missing oversight signature. Then I paused. Gave the room a moment to take it in. Around the table, eyes shifted. Some scanned the documents again. Others looked at Royce, waiting for him to speak. He didn't. Not a word. Not a denial. Just a forced jaw and shallow breath. The chair leaned forward, asked if these expenses had been vetted. Royce mumbled something about delegated authority. The deputy finance officer shook his head. That approval never reached his desk. It was a dead-end trail, designed to vanish. I closed the folio. Not with drama, with finality. The evidence was clear. Patterns of negligence, misconduct, plagiarism, and intentional misuse of resources. The chair nodded, asked the room for a motion. One hand went up, then another, then all but one. Captain Royce sat stiff, eyes wide but unfocused. He wasn't dismissed with a bang. No shouting, no insults, just a vote. Effective immediately. He was to vacate his role pending formal inquiry. He stood, grabbed his laptop like he still had something left to carry. But the weight wasn't in his hands. It was in the silence that followed. He walked out alone. No salute, no words. Just the sound of boots retreating on marble. And for the first time in months, I felt still. Not proud, not angry. Just certain that justice hadn't forgotten how to find its way through a closed door. They offered me the seat. Interim commander. Temporary but with full authority. The room waited for my answer like it was the obvious next step. Maybe it was, but I didn't take it. I looked at the faces around me. Some old, some new, some still unsure what to make of me. I didn't need a title to feel steady. I needed a purpose. And sitting in the high chair wasn't it. I told them I'd serve as strategic advisor. That I'd help repair the cracks, not just paint over them. There were younger leaders worth mentoring, systems worth fixing, but it had to be from the ground up, not the top down. They seemed surprised at first. One or two even confused, as if turning down power meant weakness. But I've seen enough command to know when a title becomes a cage. I wasn't here to decorate an org chart. I was here to restore the soul of the mission. Later that week, I walked the training grounds again. No badge, no salute, just boots in the gravel and quiet nods from soldiers who remembered. One of them stopped me, asked if I was coming back. I said, I never left, just took the long way around. Truth is, I wasn't after revenge. That path is too short and too loud. I wanted restoration, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that shows up in how a unit holds together after someone tries to tear it apart. Restoration is a quiet victory. It doesn't need parades, it just needs time, patience, and a few good men who remember what this was all supposed to be about. That's what I came back for, not to lead the charge, but to keep the foundation from crumbling. That's enough. More than enough. What would you have done if they tried to erase you after everything you built? Would you have walked away quietly, or would you have picked up the hammer too? Drop your answer in the comments. I'd like to know who's still out there that remembers what legacy really means.